How much processing is too much processing? How does the Sam Camp spam can fit into the food guide pyramid spinning plate?
When we want to science something, who is picking up the tab? And how to get where you're going with a hashtag HotGirlWalk.
Let's science it!
Hey, welcome to Nourishable. I'm Dr. Lara.
I'm Sam.
And this is Nutrition News Now. Sam, what has been going on in the nutrition news this week?
Well, do you want the good news first or the bad news first?
Oh, okay, let's go bad news first.
All right.
And. Like the word and.
Like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics.
Oh, nice. I should have guessed that.
Are you familiar with them?
I am familiar with them, yes.
Good. So, what is your kind of perception of them, first of all? How do you view them?
Well, I think that within professional scientific disciplines, it's really important to have an academy that can kind of come together and have consensus statements on controversial issues, or like developing issues within the nutrition world. So I generally view these professional societies very positively.
I'm glad you mentioned controversy.
Okay.
Controversial. Because, they've been coming under some scrutiny lately.
Okay, tell me about it.
There was an investigation conducted on them recently. It was reported in the journal Public Health Nutrition. Mm-hmm. And what it found is that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics have been accepting donations and direct funds from big pharma and other major food processing, like heavily processed food companies like Pepsi, Nestle, Abbott, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Hershey's, that kind of thing. And when it was reported on, what Executive Director of U.S. Right to Know, Gary Ruskin, had to say is that the Academy of, being part owner of ultra-processed food companies should go down as, quote, it should go down in the Conflict of Interest Hall of Fame. So, what is your first of all, what's your take on that? Like, what are the implications of and having part ownership in major food companies like that?
Well, my first piece would be that when I'm, playing my professor role and, guiding students through reading research papers, one of the things I always recommend that they do is look at the funding sources. So this would be a place where if a research study is funded by, a special interest group or a food company, I think that's important to keep in mind as you're interpreting the data. Now, I also do feel like there's another side of the coin, to play devil's advocate, of like doing science is really expensive. And right now, a lot of research will be funded by government organizations. So like the National Institute of Health is one funding agency that, researchers can apply for grants for to get their research funded. And the reality is it's competitive and there's just not a lot of money. So sometimes in order to get science done, we have to rely on funding from food companies because they have lots of money. So I feel like I could totally argue it from both sides. And, if research is helping some of these food companies make healthier products, that could be a benefit. But I also very much agree that, that you could question whether the findings and the statements that are coming out when the work or the agency is being funded by food companies may make you question whether there's any bias involved in it.
Yeah, because what Ruskin had to say about it is that the bigger picture is that are supposed to be like a source of nutrition information. They're nonprofits, so they're responsible for being that source and for being public knowledge. And them being funded by these companies means that. So what he had to say is that obesity and type 2 diabetes are like individually felt diseases. Like they're things that people suffer from individually, but they're also ultimately diseases of corporate influence. And that's where the conflict of interest kind of comes in to play here. So
Okay, I think that's really interesting. 'Cause, yeah, I also, we can look at diabetes and obesity as conditions of kind of non-communicable diseases in that, like, they're not contagious. And there certainly has been a rise in the prevalence of both of these conditions over many years, and during the time when we've also, consumed a lot more processed food from these food companies.
what place do you come from on this issue in terms of the ethics of it versus the research and the ultimate benefits that could come from it? How do you kind of reckon with that?
I come to it from a perspective of writing kind of contracts is really important. And so I would feel comfortable with kind of research funded by food companies if there were, like, really strict kind of contracts written up about the relationship between the funding source and the analysis, like the study design and analysis of the data. And often, I mean, maybe this is just because I come from academia, but I do feel like I trust academics pretty well when they say we got the funding from Pepsi, but we designed the study, we analyzed the data, they didn't have any input on those aspects. But it's hard to know if those it's hard to know really behind the scenes what actually happens.
Yeah, I think this investigation is still kind of ongoing, and this is just what they have found from it so far. So this is all we really have to go off of with it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, very interesting. Yeah. Where your money comes from is important.
Yeah. Money talks, don't it?
Money does talk.
Now that we have the bad news out of the way, and will never sound the same to me again, but I want to bring to you some positive news.
Great.
We've talked a bit about how can we find a trend, find some sort of idea that can get younger people involved in not only diet and exercise, but also research-based diet and exercise. And lucky for us, someone actually found a way.
Great. Okay, tell me about it.
It was a TikTok trend that was started by total accident one day.
The best ones always are.
Yep, and just like most things nowadays, it was a sort of byproduct of the pandemic. So recently, this TikToker by the name of Mia Lind, she started this thing called the HotGirlWalk, which is a direct homage to Megan Thee Stallion, the rapper Megan Thee Stallion. And what it is that it's not literally a hot girl walk. It's not like doing your little turn on the catwalk. It's literally like a 4-mile walk wherever you want.
I love it.
And the TikTok itself has only garnered about 250,000 views, but the hashtag that it kind of birthed has millions of views, has a whole bunch of videos coming off of it, and it has 1 billion search hits on Google.
Okay, so those are pretty good trends.
That's pretty good. And not only that, the idea behind it is actually research-based. And I want to get your take on it to see if this actually makes sense. So the idea is that the 4-mile walk would be about it would take about 30 minutes to do.
Yeah, so it depends on how quickly you walk.
Yeah. So about 150 minutes a week, this would round out to. Is that a good goal to reach for walking? And what is a good goal?
That is a great question. I would say that is an excellent goal to reach for. We can look back at what the physical activity guidelines for Americans, which are these guidelines that come out every 10 years. I think the most recent ones came out in 2018. And these guidelines were really recommending getting between 150 and 300 minutes of physical activity per week. Walking is a great way to do that. And also we've been looking at some other studies that show roughly how many steps per day are associated with reduced risk of chronic diseases later on in life. And again, a 4-mile hot girl walk, that sounds like that's about the amount that would be putting you into that reduced risk category. So I am pro hot girl walk.
Pro hot girl walk, everybody. You heard it here. So we now have observable proof that this can work, that this style of marketing to specifically younger audiences that is backed up by research can work and it can happen organically. So now the question is, how can we apply that to the foods we eat as well?
I'm going to add one more thing in before, because like
By all means.
proof is a really strong word in science. And so I would say in order to get more supportive evidence, I would be curious to see how long does this HotGirlWalk hashtag continue for? Like if I was still seeing HotGirlWalk 5 years from now and seeing evidence that people are continuing to actually do those walks, maybe we could pair it with like Fitbit data or fitness tracker data. Any brand is fine.
Of course.
Then I would be more compelled that it becomes what we call like a sticky habit. In that it's a habit that you maintain for a long period of time. Because if the HotGirlWalk trend only lasts for a month, like you're walking 4 miles a day for a month is going to have short-term benefits, but unless you maintain a increased physical activity routine like that for many years, it probably won't have that big of a difference on your health. So I would want to make sure that we can do things to kind of keep physical activity focused trends like this that I feel like are attainable, kind of within the zeitgeist.
Okay, so the idea I had was hot girl summer like meals.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like if someone can manage to actually get Megan Thee Stallion and sponsor hot girl summer meals, I think that would work a world of wonders. You get the right backing, you get the right face for it. You're promoting it. It can air on Nickelodeon just as easily as it can air on like CNN. To me, that seems like the obvious route here.
I would like it. I mean, what about something like, okay, let's see how this goes. Hot girl whole grains.
Explain.
Okay, well, so something that we look at a lot within nutrition are refined grains versus whole grains. So refined grains would be things that are made with like white flour, so like white bread or like pasta that's made with white flour. And the reason this is relevant is because when you start with a whole grain, it has this lovely husk kind of on the outside. It contains tons of fiber. There's also some vitamins in there, and then there's the inside, which is called the endosperm, full of just starch, which is often in the nutrition world, we call it just like the other sugar. And then inside there's like a tiny little seed. It's called the germ, and it has a bunch of healthy fats and beneficial vitamins in it. Now, when we take that whole grain and we strip it away to make it a refined grain, it just has the endosperm, so the starch left. And so we're kind of throwing all the benefits of the whole grain in the garbage when we eat grains in the refined form. Whereas if we eat grains in the whole grain form, we're getting all those benefits. We're getting the fiber, we're getting the vitamins, we're getting the healthy fats. So I think that promoting, if we could like somehow harness this hot girl hashtag and Megan Thee Stallion to help promote shifting from refined grains to whole grains, I think that would be a really great benefit for nutrition, and also kind of a small shift. Like it doesn't require completely changing everything about your diet. It can be shifting from white rice to brown rice or quinoa or farro or sorghum, which is a whole grain that I fed my family for dinner last night.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth mentioning that you don't have to be a girl to be a hot girl.
Oh, that is very important to mention. And have you found, are people of like all gender expressions using the HotGirlWalk hashtag?
Yeah, I explored the hashtag a little bit. You find like middle-aged dudes with their kids, you find 15-year-olds, you find people that like are straight up have like the Megan Thee Stallion almost like cosplay going on doing it. It's like, it's everywhere.
I love it.
It's spreading.
Okay, I'm going to go on a hot girl walk today. Are you going to go on a hot girl walk?
Oh, I mean, of course. How else am I supposed to be a hot girl?
I love it. That is amazing.
So that's everything that I had.
Very cool. Okay, I love hot girl walk. That sounds awesome.
Me too.
Well, I'm curious about what is your take on the term ultra-processed food? Like, what does that mean to you?
So, when I hear ultra-processed food, the only thing I can picture is a can of Spam, and the Spam is like slowly like sliding out of it. And there's like a little bit of water at the end of it. Like, where did that water come from?
Yeah, I would say Spam definitely qualifies as an ultra processed food.
Okay.
And I think what you're getting at in there as well is like that's kind of a food that is a Franken food. Like it doesn't really exist.
It's not a real food.
No. So the thing that caught my eye this week in kind of the nutrition news was this debate. This was a debate that was published by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, where two scientists had to debate kind of the concept of ultra-processed foods and whether they feel that ultra-processed food recommendations should be incorporated into dietary guidelines. How familiar are you with like the U.S. dietary guidelines?
I think you're safe to take my hesitation as a not very.
As a not very, cool.
Yeah.
Does something like My Plate ring a bell, or like the food pyramid?
Oh, the food pyramid. That's been ingrained in my brain ever since like kindergarten.
Okay, cool. So, and the food pyramid was probably something that was more around when you were in kindergarten. In the past, I don't know, probably 15 years or so, it's now a plate.
Okay.
And currently, most of the dietary guideline recommendations are based on nutrient profiles. So like how much protein is in your food, how many carbohydrates, how much fiber, how much fat, saturated fat, unsaturated fat, that kind of thing. So very nutrient profile focused. But the argument in this, or the question in this debate was, should we also consider the processing of our food in making recommendations, with the idea being that ultra-processed food, no good, minimally processed food, healthier choice. The biggest controversy to me is that the definition of ultra-processed food is pretty fuzzy. And so this goes back to an organization called NOVA that came up with the definitions of ultra-processed food, where they kind of came up with 4 categories. Minimally processed, processed culinary ingredients, so that'd be things like olive oil, where like, you had to squeeze the olive to get the oil out, but then you can use the olive oil in other things. Processed food, and then ultra-processed food, which is like the most processed of the spectrum.
Okay.
And it would be including ingredients that really you couldn't like go to the grocery store and buy to cook at home with. So a lot of like emulsifiers and anti-caking agents and thickeners and things like that.
Okay. So with ultra-processed food, the argument, or at least like the general perception, at least in my brain, seems to be that like the more processed, the worse. The least processed, the better.
Exactly.
So if that's the case, like why would we even have ultra-processed food being approved at all?
Good question. So kind of over the years of the spectrum of food processing, we definitely need some food processing to preserve our food. Fresh whole food like can go bad. So sometimes we've dried things, we've fermented things, we've put additives in things like salt to help them stay good for longer. And like in many ways, like that's good and necessary. We don't, eating rotten food, bad for your health.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is there like something with super processed food that you cannot get with healthy food, or like minimally processed food that you wouldn't be able to get?
Well, really good question. I mean, certainly there could be things. Like one example we could take would be when we supplement or fortify foods. So let's take milk, for example. We often think about milk as being a great source of vitamin D. Milk doesn't naturally contain vitamin D. We actually add it in. So that could be one example where the processing really added something to the food that it'd be really hard for us to get otherwise.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I have a game I would like to play with you.
I was not made aware of this.
I have props. Okay. Our goal is to figure out, is it ultra processed, processed, or minimally processed?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, well. Oh, wait. My bad. No. Wait. No.
Woohoo!
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Minimally processed. I would say this apple counts as minimally processed.
Yeah. It doesn't look very genetically modified to me.
Well, and would genetic modification actually don't even think would fall within any of the definitions of ultra processed food. Do you feel like it should?
Oh, well, I don't know. Should it?
I don't know. I'm actually feeling pretty comfortable with genetic modification of food. And I think that there's a lot of technologies these days that can actually make it pretty safe in a really great way to enhance the nutrient density. But I know that can be a controversial view.
Yeah. So let's save the controversy
For another day.
Let's have fun.
I love it. Okay. Cheddar cheese. Yeah, I would also say processed. Oat milk. Oh, so trendy.
Oh, man. Gotta take my thinking cap off for this. I'm gonna just go for broke.
I agree
Let's
with you.
go.
Yeah,
Oh
and
my
so
God, I'm a
this is
genius.
interesting because the reason I feel that this is an ultra processed product is because when we look at the ingredients, we see, oat milk, that could be, oats, but then we kind of milked them. No, we soaked them in water, really.
Okay.
But then
Wait,
there's,
you're telling me oats don't have little udders on them?
there are oats doesn't have any nipples.
What?
I know, shocking.
Oh my God, I've been lied to my whole life.
Okay, but then we see some of these other ingredients like dipotassium phosphate, which is a stabilizer. We see gellan gum, which is something to make it feel thick.
Okay.
So those are kind of the two ingredients to me that jump out as being making it qualify as ultra processed.
Okay.
But, there could be different ways of looking at it.
Okay. So with that, my thought of ultra processed is kind of like being rewired a little bit. 'Cause
Okay.
now it's like, wait, if oat milk counts as ultra processed, if I can group that in my head with spam, then what else can fall in there?
Right, because I would say oat milk probably has a bit of a health halo where it falls under what we would usually call or think of as very healthy because of how it's been marketed.
Yeah, it's like something you'd serve next to avocado toast.
Yes, I'm a big avocado toast fan.
Woo!
Okay, these are smoked apple sage plant-based sausages. Ultra processed.
That just
I agree.
looks unnatural. That does not grow out of the ground.
I agree. And, parts of it did. Some of the ingredients are Yukon Gold potatoes, dried apples, but there's also vital wheat gluten, so that, protein that we've taken out of wheat, as well as some smoke flavor, natural smoke flavor.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I feel like actually I could argue this one both ways. And in some ways, this is meant to demonstrate that it's a little fuzzy. Maybe we agree, maybe we don't agree on every food product. And so that is one of the big critiques about using ultra-processed foods as part of our dietary recommendations is that there's not really a clear way of defining what is ultra-processed and what isn't. One of the other points of contention within whether or not we should use ultra-processed foods as part of our dietary guidelines is that some argue that the data, the research that's been looking at ultra-processed food and health, is also kind of inconsistent and not of very good quality. So I was first exposed to this, I think it was back in 2018. There was a big a randomized controlled trial, and what they found over the course of the 2 weeks is that when people were on the ultra-processed diet, they gained 2 pounds, and they tended to eat a larger volume of food, more calories, faster. Even though, from the nutrient perspective, the foods were identical.
I guess my big concern with ultra-processed foods would just be, the health risks of it. Are you more at a health risk in having more ultra-processed foods like these? Mm-hmm. Or would you be less at risk just sticking with a good old-fashioned apple?
Right. And that, in some ways, we don't have the answer to that. We don't have the answer of how, if people eat ultra-processed foods of these categories, plant-based kind of formulations over their course of lifetime, are they healthier compared to people who eat ultra-processed food in the form of chips and burgers and fast food? We don't really have the answer to that. Okay. One side of the debate thought that study in the research institution, they thought it was great. They said, see, this is causational data showing that eating ultra-processed food makes you gain weight, makes you overeat, kind of throws off how your body understands if it's full or not. The other side of the argument said, this is way too short term. We don't know what would happen if people ate like this over many years. We can't tell anything from just 2 weeks. And so the other side, they said, when we look at these observational studies where we see what people, we ask people through surveys what they eat, and we look at their health risks over time, they said that data is not very clear, not very consistent, is full of confounders that make it so we can't really get an answer. As a media consumer, when you get a headline like ultra-processed food is terrible for you, do you feel like that changes your behavior right away?
I feel like it doesn't change my thought process much because I think ultra-processed food just has such an ugly connotation to it as is.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see a headline like that, in my head I'm like, okay, it's Tuesday. And then I just kind of move on.
I think there's elements of ultra-processed foods that we should try and limit our consumption of, but the actual definition right now of ultra-processed, I think, is too murky to be useful.
Yeah, and what it kind of speaks to for me is it's a reminder of how fluid science is. Science, no matter how defined it may get or how fancy or obtuse the language may seem to someone who didn't major or never was a science person like this, it's always helpful to remember that science is made up of just regular people trying to find the answers to all these questions, and those answers just are not there yet. And it's easy to forget that because science seems so to the point, so direct, and so final all the time. But no, it's a fluid process full of experimenting, hypothesizing, and maybe finding answers at the end of all of this stuff that may take years to even come close to scratching the surface of.
Right now, one of the biggest challenges I see in nutrition research is just that dietary assessment is really tricky to do. Right now, mostly it's done by giving you a big, huge, giant survey to say, in the past year, how often did you eat strawberries? All of that is to go along with the point of data is fluid over time. It builds on previous science, and I would expect it to continue to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Thank you so much for joining me today, Sam.
My pleasure. I'm glad I could be here.
Well, if you are interested in reading up on some of the references we talked about today, we included them in the video description.
And if you have a news story that interests you that you want to send us, that you want us to talk about, our social media will also be linked in the description. Mine, the channels, feel free to send it there. We will look it over. We will talk about it.
That's what science tastes like.
Now with 100% more processing.